we took a slow amble to the village of Wray-with-botton. That's Botton with an N, so you can stop that giggling at the back. Situated at the eastern end of the Lune Valley in the city of Lancaster district. Or rather, we took a slow amble to the village of Wray-with-botton via an archaeological excavation that Wire Archaeology were conducting down at Brock Bottoms. It was quite a major detour, I must admit, but we had nothing better to do. And when I say an archaeological excavation conducted by Wire Archaeology, of course, there was just one bloke there, digging away by himself. An amiable, enthusiastic archaeologist called Ken. The rest of Wire Archaeology would naturally take credit for everything after he'd finished, even though they were down the pub at the time, because some things never change. There's no record of the building on Ordnance Survey heritage maps suggesting that it probably predates the Victorian era. It also possibly once sported long since rotted wattle and daub walls as well, the stones now visible being just the foundations. By how much the said building predates the Ordnance Survey, and exactly what use the minuscule rooms were put to, Ken is hoping to find out with his trowel. Me and Jeannie McIntosh stumbled around the aforementioned foundations for a short while, couldn't reach any conclusion, then wandered off to take a gander at the ivy-clad ruins of nearby Brock Mill, which we've covered before in a previous episode, so we won't be covering them again here, except to mention Crompton, the mill's owner, whose name is so amusing we just wanted to repeat it. Jeannie McIntosh had never seen this lost Peruvian temple of a structure before. There seemed to be less of it since the last time I had visited. Nature is very slowly reclaiming its own. That probably should have been spoken in a more melancholy sort of voice, but to be honest, I'm not that bothered. And so to Ray, the long way round, a timeless chocolate box of stone-built cottages, where it's easy to believe that inquisitive octogenarians in tweed skirts could solve diabolical murders in Jacobean vicarages. This would have suited Jeannie McIntosh no end if she'd had a deductive, quick-witted enough mind, but unfortunately she hasn't. Ray was described by Nicholas Pesner, the famous architectural historian and author of the somewhat obsessive 46-volume Buildings of England, as being especially pretty village street. It could have been worse. It was also described by one website that we came across as having some fame arising from scarecrows and maggots. We couldn't be bothered reading any further, so your guess is as good as ours. Most of the cottages in Ray are confluenced in late Tudor / early Jacobean terraces that more likely belong to a 1970s Hovis advert. The whole place being somewhere you'd retire to when you'd had enough of life but still had plenty of money left, and it'd have to be plenty of money and all. Apart from the flashy sports cars driven by pot-bellied balding men as part of their midlife crises, the village seems to be intransigent. Some might say stale or even decomposing. Not us, of course. During our researches, we uncovered a letter describing the village of Ray before the outbreak of the First World War as composed of one long street beginning at the New Inn. An old lady named Mrs. Shackleton, the landlady. She had white hair and wore a black lace cap. Obviously, most of the places mentioned don't exist anymore, so we're just throwing in some random footage. Said letter goes on at some considerable length, almost as long as Pevsner's magnum opus, only without the footnotes. So we'll appreciate to the highlights, if you can call them that, such as: the sweet shop was part of a cottage lived in by Richard and Libby Towers, the caretakers at the Quaker Chapel. And next came Mr. Townsend's The Butcher's, where people could buy giblets from the poultry for sixpence. And what delicious meals could be enjoyed by whole families, including the cats. That's the sort of social observation that marked Homer down as a classic poet. And Reverend C.L. Reynolds was an elderly gentleman with a long white beard, who liked to entertain the children of the village to tea parties. Times were more innocent back then, before Operation U-Tree. Stop me when you've had enough. You've had enough? Fair enough, I've stopped. Me and Jeannie McIntosh bought a reasonably priced sausage roll from the appropriately named village shop. We couldn't afford the not quite so reasonably priced steak pie. Those of us who live in the hinterlands of Arcadia are currently undergoing a cost of living crisis. There was agriculture and cattle and mills in Wray long ago. Tractors still thunder up and down the street nowadays. But as pleasant as the village is, it's historically rather dull, so we buggered off to Littledale in search of a derelict church filled with sheep and abandoned farm equipment instead. We found it too, perched halfway up a valley in the middle of nowhere, just over the brow from Littledale Hall, a residential drug rehabilitation centre. A lick of paint, some glass in the windows, a connection to the water supply in the valley below, and some sort of generator, and you still wouldn't be able to live in this Ozymandias-like tumble-down monument to a more ecclesiastical age. It was built in 1849 for Reverend John Dodson, previously the Vicar of Cockerham, who told the Anglican Church to get stuffed after an incident called the Gorham Judgment. Basically, he believed that people had to behave like Christians and not just get baptised to gain entry into heaven. Naturally, the church authorities, who'd never behaved like Christians in their entire lives, disagreed. The Reverend's grave, along with that of his son, also called John, as Crompton's parents could attest, they weren't particularly inventive when it came to naming their children back in Victorian times. They're the only solitary occupants of the graveyard, other than the sheep, of course. John Dobson Jr. was only 18 when he died. We don't know how he kicked the bucket, but his grave slab has definitely seen better days. And that's about enough for now. Actually, more than enough by about 86 episodes. Click like, subscribe, all the usual guff. Same time, same place, next week, all being well.